at least Spider-Man No Way Home. It's a good movie and without a doubt, worth a watch. This movie does a great job of balancing its cast and giving everyone a time to shine. It's willing to lean into the more serious side of these comedic characters and it really pays off. With that said, it's not a perfect movie, and there are some problems I have with it that really keep it from feeling like a satisfying ending for me. Here's your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen this movie yet, I highly suggest you give it a watch. Let's start with the positives, because there is a lot of stuff to praise in this movie. One of the biggest things I was worried about was bad humor, because Marvel has had the worst track record with this, and the writing just gets worse and worse over the years. But the jokes in this movie are super refreshing. I could count on one hand the amount of things that were supposed to make me laugh that didn't. Comedy is baked into the DNA of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, so it doesn't feel out of place like it does in so many other Marvel movies when they undercut a serious scene with something silly, because that's kind of what you're there for. And all the characters are naturally funny because they show that that's how they deal with the really serious stuff that's happened to them. Ironically, this is the franchise with the most jokes by far, and it's the only one that seems to know when to stop joking and give you something heartfelt and serious. Humor is used by these characters to mask their trauma, so it doesn't feel out of place when they shift the tone really quickly from something light to something dark. This series always takes the time to remind you that the reason these characters act this way is due to their deep underlying problems. Scenes like Yondu and Rocket talking in Guardians Volume 2 about what made him this way, Quill taking the name Star-Lord because that's what his mother called him before she died of cancer, him repeatedly risking his life for the stupid Walkman because it was from her. These kind of scenes make you care about the characters and stop them from feeling like conveyor belts for jokes. And Volume 3 has the best balance of these scenes and the comedy out of the whole series by far. Another thing this movie does really well is balancing the now large cast. Quill in particular got a lot of maintenance that he really needed after the way he's been represented in other projects. In his last few MCU outings, he's done little else than make mistakes and serve as the butt of many jokes. In Infinity War, he ruins the plan of defeating Thanos by attacking him and, getting half the universe killed. In Avengers Endgame, he pops up to get kicked in the balls and have a joke made about how stupid he is. And in Marvel's What If series, T'Challa takes over the mantle of Star-Lord and does it 1,000 times better than Peter Quill does. And yes, Star-Lord has always been a goofy and funny character, but the reason he's actually likable is because when it comes down to it, he can be genuinely clever and capable. He has real emotional depth under the surface, and that's what makes him so compelling. This movie is a nice return to form for this character. He has plans go successfully, he has clever ideas, and he's a natural leader in this movie as well as being goofy and funny. Likewise, Drax is a character that had some real emotional depth in the first Guardians movie, but since then has been reduced to nothing but comedic relief. Volume 1 had a pretty big emphasis on the grief he struggled with over losing his family and his desire for revenge. While it wasn't Shakespeare by any means, it grounded him so that he wasn't a walking punchline. Volume 2 pushed him further into a purely comedic character than the first movie had, and his appearances following this lacked emotional depth altogether. To be clear, I do really enjoy most of the humor surrounding Drax in the MCU, but not at the expense of him becoming a character of himself. Especially after playing the Guardians of the Galaxy video game, and seeing how well it represented all the characters. The missed potential with Drax in this series has stuck out like a sore thumb to me. He's still hilarious in this movie as well, but there is some acknowledgement of how no one takes him seriously anymore, as he just constantly messes everything up and seems very stupid. This movie gives him a little more to work with, showing that he is the only one of the Guardians that can actually relate to and comfort children. They hint at a pretty cute and full circle ending for him, implying that he's gonna settle down and raise a family again. He also just seems physically stronger in this movie, which is nice to see. And all of this is done without sacrificing how funny this character really is. Again, he's not the deepest character by any means, but it is really appreciated the work that went into fixing him. Nebula is another character that was given a lot to work with here. The way she acts is a far cry from her introduction in the series and parallels how Gamora was in the first movie really nicely. She's had a really natural and earned progression over the course of her time in the MCU. Seeing her and Gamora switch places in their sibling dynamic is really fitting, and her taking the role of the moral and empathetic one of them is a really nice shift. It's also great to see how her friendship with Quill has grown and how much she sticks up for him in this movie. She clearly cares a lot about the Guardians of the family. Gamora is also used really well in this movie. James Gunn was given a pretty difficult task following Endgame and making Gamora work here. I'm almost never in favor of reviving dead characters, especially right after killing them. It takes all the emotion out of their death. Following the odd way she was brought back by having a past version of herself brought to the future made me really think her role in this movie would be falling in love with Quill again, and make the emotional punch of him losing her just disappear. Also, it'd be kind of creepy if they replaced Gamora with a different version of herself to fill the shoes of the old one. It would feel almost like grooming if the Guardians gaslit her into falling back in love with Quill. If they got back together just because everyone kept repeatedly telling her that they need to, and rejoining the crew like nothing happened, it would have been kind of messed up. But they really do the best they can with her here by treating her like a completely different character in this movie. She's really hostile, and she plans on betraying them at one point. And while she does grow to like the Guardians and Quill, there's a clear acknowledgement from her and Quill that whatever they had before is gone. It would have kind of ruined the finality and melancholy feeling between them had they gotten back together at the end. Rocket's the clear star of the show here. He's the main character of this movie, and he's given a lot to work with. This is what I was really looking forward to the most for this movie, because it promised to get serious and give some more depth to Rocket. The flashback sequences do not disappoint and hit you like a truck in the feels. They really had the cheat code here, that is having a bunch of cute animals get hurt to pull on your heartstrings and make you despise the villain, and it is executed really well. While even just his scenes in the first Guardians movie made him one of, if not the most well-developed and tragic characters for this franchise, this movie solidly puts him at number 1 for me. Seeing him claw that fucker's face off was fantastic, and it was gut-wrenching to see his friends killed right before his eyes. The only characters that feel kind of overlooked here are Mantis and Groot. They don't really change much this movie, except that Groot flies now, and looks like a goddamn bodybuilder. The High Evolutionary is a pretty good villain in this movie. He is extremely hateable and has a god complex, kind of like Kristoff from The Truman Show. Still, I don't think he's one of the best villains in the MCU, and there are a couple ways I think they could improve him. And they both revolve around making the society that he created actually perfect. If his society was very good, but he is nitpicking tiny things and obsessing over them, it would show that he's not really about creating a perfect society. He is a perfectionist and must play God, and he will always find fault even when none exists. On the other hand, you could have his perfect society functional and have him not destroy it. Make the audience kind of see where he's coming from and make his methods successful. Him being right about doing this actually improving society would make it a little easier to understand why he does it. And then you start that debate in the audience's head of whether it's worth it to actually do this and create a perfect society. The way it's written now, the Guardians saving the animals kind of seems like an afterthought because Rocket makes them. I think it would feel more heartfelt if the Guardians take him down solely for the sake of the animals because it's not worth it. With that said, he's still a pretty good villain the way he is. I just think these little touches would make him a lot more compelling. Getting back on track, with the last really great thing this movie does is not having forced ties to the MCU. It was so refreshing to not feel like this movie needed 10 projects before it to back it up, or like it only existed to push people to see something else. It's not punishing anyone for not seeing the last few shows or movies, and finally, it's a movie that doesn't rely on other things to justify its worth. It's actually satisfying in its own right to watch. With all that out of the way, let's get into the things that really bothered me here. Number 1 is the fake out deaths. These were just bad. They fake you out early in the movie with Drax getting shot. And it's like, okay, you got me. I really thought he was gonna die because it's a serious movie. But in hindsight, since you didn't kill anyone, this is really unsatisfying. The bare minimum that this should have accomplished is to set the tone for this movie that you are actually willing to kill characters. This fake out's already questionable because if Drax dies here, it's not a satisfying end to his character. After this, you have the big fake out with Rocket, which is the only fake out that I think should stay in the movie. But it went way too long, and I'm personally never a fan of characters going to heaven, but someone up in heaven's like, no, it's not your time yet, you have more to do. The only time I've ever liked this in a movie that I remember is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 with Dumbledore. That heaven scene was justified by the Horcrux being in Harry, plus even with that, Harry had to choose to go back. It's not like he died and then someone's like, no, you're not gonna die actually. Another scene that's similar to this, but not exactly the same, that really works, is the Thanos and Gamora scene in Infinity War. and that one is justified by the Soul Stone. Still, if I had to leave one fake out in this movie, it would be this one, as this is the only one that will hold up on multiple viewings. This one has depth to it because it would narratively be satisfying if Rocket died here. I could see this movie going a completely other direction after this point where the Guardians avenge Rocket's death, and you're all for it because you've seen everything that happened to him. But after this one, there's a Peter Quill fake out. This is the point in the movie that these fake outs became really annoying to me because I knew they weren't going to kill anyone. This one is also bad because if Peter Quill dies here after they've already won just because he went back for his Walkman, that's really dumb and it's not meaningful or satisfying for that character. Also, the circumstances of this are pretty dumb too. I mean, he's gonna die here because he forgot his mask and boots at home. Also, the realism aspect of him surviving this is annoying. Even if there's some really obscure scientific evidence that's out there somewhere on if a person could technically survive this amount of time in space if they had no air in their lungs or some other specific bullshit, why would you do that? And have him be in space so long? It's like they want the audience to be taken out of the story and debate whether this is possible or not. I just don't understand what the writers thought they were gaining by putting this in the movie. This film plays it so incredibly safe that its focus on the Guardians ending gives it tonal whiplash and makes it feel slightly hollow. Another problem is that Adam Warlock does not belong in this movie at all. It's really clear that he is here to be part of the Guardians in later movies, and he feels really artificially placed into the plot. I think the casting was really bad for this role as well. He's a complete joke in this movie, and he spends the whole thing just getting beaten up by everybody with the lousy, half-hearted redemption of saving Quill at the end. Other than initially injuring Rocket, he has little relevance to the plot, and he feels like he's just stealing screen time. The biggest gripe I have with this movie is that it's clearly focused on being a fitting ending for the Guardians of the Galaxy, but also kind of not really. This film really dances between wrapping things up for its characters and trying to set up future movies. Quill leaves, but they can't make it past the credits without blurting out that he'll be back. Nebula and Drax are building nowhere, but would clearly still be available and willing to go on adventures if they were needed. Mantis leaves to do her own thing, which is vague and definitely leaves the door open to return if they want. Rocket is now leading the Guardians with Groot at his side, so they will both return for sure. And Gamora is still with the Ravagers causing chaos. And ironically, this is actually the only one who feels like they're really gone from the team. The writers framed this story well as a satisfying ending for the franchise, but because they must leave the door open for sequels, they can't actually pull the trigger and commit to it. They refuse to kill any of the main characters, which only becomes a problem because they desperately want to act like they will. It doesn't have to be that kind of movie to be good, but if it's not that kind of movie, stop pretending that it is. They want us to treat this like a finale, but they refuse to allow anything to happen that would make it final. And that takes away a lot of the weight that this movie should carry, because you say this is the end, but frankly, I'm just not buying it. Those are my major gripes with the film. With that said, I'm going to get into my nitpicks, and I completely understand people don't agree with this. These are just personal preference. The first one is the presence of Kraglin and Cosmo. There's a running joke that they have that actually got pretty old to me really quick, and that was the good dog bit that ran throughout the movie. Cosmo in general was a disappointment to me because I found this character really funny in the Guardians of the Galaxy game, but not really funny here. I also think Kraglin does not need this much screen time and should have kinda just been a background character like he was in the first two movies. And it was not exciting for me to see him on the new Guardians team, which is already full of really boring and stale characters to me. This movie also uses slow motion a little too much for my taste. The long walk-up scene in the third act and the really long hallway fight scene in slow motion were just too much of it for me, and I wanted to get to the next part of the movie already. The actual action in that scene was really fun, but too long. If they had just used the walk-up frame, it probably wouldn't have bothered me, but they went with slow motion during both, and it got tedious. Rocket also not killing the High Evolutionary because he's a Guardian of the Galaxy is a little forced to me as well. But it doesn't take away from the climax enough to really bother me. And the last thing is that Star-Lord's "I don't need another boring villain" monologue line really didn't like it. I don't like it because it's kind of a fourth wall break, almost like admitting that your villain's motivations are boring and generic, and a bit too on the nose for my taste. It's like telling your audience to tune out the villain because it's just more of the same, which is an odd move to me because I feel like this villain is really close to having some real depth to him. Okay, and I have one more, but it's actually the last one. And that's when Groot says, "I love you guys," at the end of the movie. This was really silly and made me laugh, honestly. I know James Gunn said in an interview that it's really the audience understanding him now, but it was just so silly it took me out of it. And I think that idea would have been conveyed better if he had maybe had some subtitles or something showing that he's still speaking the same, but we understand what he's saying now. I know I listed a lot of things that bothered me, but I still really enjoy this movie. It is great. It's definitely worth seeing. It's a really good Guardians movie, though I still think the first one is slightly better. But that might change on a rewatch. Rocket steals the show, all the characters are done justice. The only problems I have with it is the way that the story was executed in a couple places. And though I think this movie would work better as a finale, I know they're already going to bring back Star-Lord and probably all the characters. I just hope they at least give it time to rest and let us sit with the ending that we got. With all that said, let me know what you guys thought down in the comments. I know I might get blasted because people have really been loving this movie, and I love it too. But I realize I probably have a lot more gripes with it than other people do. But let me know. Drop a comment. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And I'll catch you all in the next HeadCannon breakdown. Thanks for watching.